Music publishers are suing Anthropic for $3 billion. The claim? Anthropic trained Claude on 20,000 copyrighted songs without permission. But here's why this matters beyond one lawsuit. If the music industry wins, it doesn't just affect Anthropic, it affects every AI company. Because the question at the heart of this case is AI training on copyrighted content legal at all? And the answer will determine whether AI development continues as it has or fundamentally transforms. The stakes couldn't be higher. AI companies argue that training is transformative use, protected under fair use doctrine. Copyright holders argue that training is systematic copying, requiring licenses. Both sides have compelling points, and whichever way courts decide will create precedent for billions of dollars in licensing fees, reshape how AI models are built, and potentially advantage whoever gets the legal framework they want. In this video, we're breaking down the Anthropic lawsuit in detail, how AI training actually works technically, the legal frameworks colliding, what different court outcomes would mean, and how this connects to similar battles playing out globally. This is the case that could change everything. Here we are reporting the news about the lawsuit and some possible effects. No law or legal advice is given or intended. If you are directly involved in any of these or similar proceedings, get legal counsel. Let's start with the specific allegations. Music publishers, representing major labels and songwriters, filed a lawsuit alleging that Anthropic infringed on over 20,000 copyrighted works. Originally, the lawsuit cited about 500 songs. But as discovery progressed, that number grew to 20,000. These aren't background training data. These are specific songs where publishers claim they can demonstrate Claude reproducing lyrics or musical patterns that could only come from training on copyrighted material. The damages calculation is aggressive. $3 billion. How did they arrive at that number? The calculation is based on statutory damages for copyright infringement. Under U.S. copyright law, infringement can result in statutory damages of up to $150,000 per work. Multiply that by 20,000 works, and you get to $3 billion. This isn't a calculation of actual harm or lost revenue. This is the maximum penalty allowed by law. It's designed to be punitive and to send a message that training on copyrighted content carries severe financial risk. Anthropic's defense rests on fair use. They argue that training AI models is a transformative use of copyrighted content, similar to how search engines index web pages or how thumbnail images are used in search results. The model doesn't store the copyrighted works. It learns patterns from them. And the output is original content, not reproduction of the training data. This is fundamentally different from piracy, Anthropic argues. The model is not a database of songs. It's a mathematical compression of patterns, learned from many sources. The plaintiffs counter with several arguments. First, they demonstrate that Claude can, in some cases, reproduce lyrics when prompted. If the model can regenerate the copyrighted work, they argue, it must have stored it in some form. Second, they point to the scale. This isn't incidental copying. It's systematic ingestion of their entire catalogs. Third, they argue that AI-generated music competes with licensed music. If businesses use AI to create background music instead of licensing real songs, that's direct market harm. These are strong arguments that fair use doesn't typically protect commercial uses that harm the market for the original work. To understand the legal question, we need to understand the technical process. How does AI training actually work? Let's start with the data. AI companies collect massive data sets from the internet. For language models, that includes websites, books, articles, and yes, lyrics. For image models, it includes photos, artwork, illustrations. The model is exposed to billions of examples. But here's the critical technical point. The training data is not stored in the final model. The model is not a compressed archive of copyrighted works. It's a neural network with learned statistical patterns. Think of it like learning to paint. If you study thousands of paintings by famous artists, you learn techniques, styles, color theory. Your brain stores patterns, not copies of the paintings. When you create your own art, it's informed by what you learned, but it's not reproductions. AI training is analogous. The model observes patterns in the data. It adjusts its internal parameters to better predict the next word or the next pixel. The final model is the mathematical encoding of those patterns. But here's where it gets legally complicated. If the model can, when prompted, recreate something very similar to a copyrighted work, does that mean it stored the work in a distributed encoded form? There's a technical phenomenon called memorization that's relevant here. Sometimes, especially with data that appears frequently in training, neural networks memorize exact phrases or sequences. This is well documented in AI research. If a particular song's lyrics appeared many times in the training data, the model might memorize them, even though memorization isn't the goal. It's more likely to happen with content that's repeated, distinctive, or appears at the end of training. Researchers have shown that large language models can, under specific prompting, reproduce segments of their training data. This is a problem for the fair use defense because it demonstrates that training doesn't completely transform the content. Some original works can leak through. The size and nature of training datasets raises another issue. AI companies often use datasets scraped from the internet. Common Crawl, The Pile, Leon for images. These datasets are massive and often include copyrighted content because that content is publicly accessible on the internet. But publicly accessible doesn't mean public domain. Just because you can read a website doesn't mean you have the right to use its content for commercial AI training. This is the Napster moment parallel that copyright lawyers reference. Napster argued they just facilitated sharing. Courts said that was still infringement. AI companies argue they're learning from publicly available data. Copyright holders say that's still infringement at scale. There's technical nuance around embeddings and representations. When a model processes a song, it creates an embedding, a mathematical representation in high-dimensional space. That embedding captures semantic meaning, style, tone. But it's not the song itself. It's a point in mathematical space. The model learns to navigate this space, to understand relationships between concepts. When it generates output, it's not retrieving stored songs. It's navigating a learned conceptual space and generating tokens that satisfy the patterns it learned. This is genuinely transformative. But the legal system struggles with this because there's no precedent for mathematical representations of creative works. Is an embedding of a copyrighted song a derivative work? Courts haven't answered this yet. Now let's look at the legal framework. U.S. copyright law is governed by Title 17 of the U.S. Code. Fair use is defined in Section 107. 4 factors determine whether use is fair: purpose and character of use, nature of the copyrighted work, amount used, and effect on the market. Let's apply these to AI training. Factor 1. Purpose. AI training is commercial and for-profit. That weighs against fair use. But it's also transformative, creating something new. That weighs for fair use. Factor 2. Nature of the work. Creative works like music get stronger copyright protection than factual works. Weighs against fair use. Factor 3. Amount used. The entire work is ingested during training. Weighs against fair use. Factor 4. Market effect. This is contested. Does AI music harm the market for licensed music? Critical question. But fair use is contextual and evolving. Past cases provide some relevant precedent. Google Books scanned millions of copyrighted books to create a searchable index. Authors sued. Courts ruled it was fair use because it was transformative and enabled new functionality. Google image search uses copyrighted images as thumbnails. Fair use. Reverse engineering software to understand how it works. Fair use in some contexts. The pattern, If the use is sufficiently transformative and doesn't substitute for the original, courts have sided with fair use even when commercial. AI companies argue their use fits this pattern, but there's a counter precedent. Commercial uses that harm markets typically fail fair use. Music sampling, even brief clips, requires licenses. Internationally, the landscape is even more complex. The European Union's approach is different from the US. The EU has not adopted fair use. Instead, they have specific exceptions in copyright law. The EU Copyright Directive includes a text and data mining exception for research purposes. But commercial AI training might not qualify. Some EU countries are implementing stricter interpretations. In the UK, there was a proposal for a broad TDM exception for AI, but it stalled after pushback from rights holders. Japan, interestingly, has one of the most permissive approaches, explicitly allowing AI training without requiring licenses. China's approach is evolving, but tends toward requiring licenses. This fragmentation means AI companies face different legal risks in different jurisdictions. There's also the question of whether current law is adequate. Copyright law was written for human creators and distributors. The concepts of copying, reproduction, distribution all assume human-scale activities. But AI training involves processing billions of works simultaneously in ways that don't fit traditional categories. Is training copying? Technically, yes. Training involves temporary copies in GPU memory, but they're ephemeral and not stored. Is generation reproduction? Only if the output is substantially similar to a copyrighted work. But what about learned patterns that inform outputs without reproducing them? The law doesn't have clear answers because these technologies didn't exist when the law was written. This might require new legislation specifically for AI, not just judicial interpretation of old statutes. One more legal consideration: the doctrine of substantial similarity. To prove copyright infringement, you need to show substantial similarity between the infringing work and the copyrighted work. But what's the infringing work in AI training? Is it the model itself? The training process? The outputs? If it's the outputs, then infringement only occurs when the AI generates something substantially similar to a copyrighted work. That would mean most AI use is fine. Only problematic generations are infringing. But if the model itself is considered a derivative work, or the training process is considered reproduction, then liability is much broader. This legal uncertainty creates massive risk because companies don't know what they're liable for until courts decide. Let's game out the scenarios. Scenario 1. AI companies win. Courts rule that training on copyrighted content is fair use, that learned patterns are transformative, and that AI models aren't derivative works. What happens? AI development continues largely as is. Open source models proliferate because anyone can train on internet data. Costs stay low because no licensing fees. Innovation accelerates. But creative industries face disruption as AI-generated content competes with human-created content without compensating creators. Market dynamics shift toward AI generation. Human creators either adapt or struggle. Scenario 2. Copyright holders win. Courts rule that training on copyrighted content requires licenses, that AI models are derivative works, or that the scale of copying negates their use. What happens? AI companies must license training data. This creates a massive licensing economy. Copyright holders can charge fees. Getty Images, music labels, publishers all get paid. But costs explode. Training GPT-level models on licensed data could cost hundreds of millions or billions in licensing fees. That consolidates AI to only the wealthiest companies. Open source AI becomes much harder because individual developers can't afford licenses. Innovation might slow, but human creators get compensated and retain bargaining power. Scenario 3. Split decision. Courts rule that some training is fair use, but with limitations. Perhaps training on publicly available internet data is okay, but training on licensed content databases requires permission. Or non-commercial research use is fair, but commercial deployment requires licenses. This creates a tiered system. Academic researchers can train freely. Companies need licenses for commercial models. This might be the compromise position. It balances innovation and creator rights, but it adds complexity. What counts as commercial? What if a model is trained for research, then later commercialized? Designing boundaries will spawn new litigation. Scenario 4. Legislative solution. Congress recognizes that courts can't resolve this through existing law and passes new legislation specifically for AI. This could create a compulsory licensing scheme, similar to mechanical licenses for cover songs. AI companies can train on copyrighted content, but must pay statutory rates set by law. Or it could create a new exception for AI training with guardrails. The advantage? Clarity and uniformity. The disadvantage? Legislation is slow, lobbying influences outcomes, and getting it right on the first try is unlikely. Tech companies want permissive rules. Creative industries want protective rules. The result is likely a compromise that satisfies neither fully. The timing is critical. The Anthropic case won't be the only one decided. There are multiple AI copyright lawsuits pending. Getty Images sued Stability AI. Artists are suing image generators. Authors are suing text models. These cases are in various stages. Different courts might rule differently, creating a patchwork until the Supreme Court potentially weighs in. That could take years. Meanwhile, AI companies are operating in legal uncertainty. Some are proactively licensing content. Adobe's Firefly is trained only on licensed Adobe stock images. Others are taking the risk that fair use will protect them. The market is bifurcating between conservative, licensed approaches and aggressive, fair use reliant approaches. If you're using AI tools, understand that the legal foundation is unsettled. The AI you use today might be built on copyrighted data that courts eventually rule was improperly used. That doesn't necessarily make your use illegal. Users typically aren't liable for how the tool was built, but the tool providers might face liability. If an AI company loses a massive lawsuit, it could affect service availability or pricing. Tools might shut down. Prices might spike to cover licensing. Be aware of this risk, especially if you're building business-critical processes on AI tools from companies with unsettled legal status. If you're a creator, know your rights and options. If you want to opt out of AI training, some tools now respect robots.txt files or offer opt-out mechanisms. But these are voluntary. There's no legal requirement yet. Organizations like the Authors Guild and music industry groups are fighting for creator rights. You can join collective actions or advocacy groups. On the other side, some creators are embracing AI, licensing their work for training, or using AI as a tool. There's no one right answer, but informed decisions require understanding the legal landscape and your leverage. The outcome of cases like Anthropic will determine whether creators have veto power over AI training or not. For AI developers, the message is pay attention to training data sources and document your fair use rationale. If you're training models, keep records of what data you used and why you believe it's fair use. Consider licensing content where possible, especially for commercial applications. Monitor legal developments because the rules are evolving in real time. And if you're building applications, assume that models might change or become unavailable if legal challenges succeed. Build with abstraction layers so you can swap models if needed. The legal uncertainty is a technical risk that requires architectural planning. If you want to stay informed on how AI copyright law evolves, subscribe to Key Advances. This is a developing story with massive implications. We'll cover new rulings, settlements, and policy changes as they happen. If this breakdown helped you understand the collision between AI training and copyright law, Hit that like button. Complex legal topics need substantive coverage, and your engagement helps. Ring that notification bell for more deep dives on AI development. We're covering the trends and tensions shaping the industry with the detail that matters. Let's recap. Anthropic faces a $3 billion lawsuit for training Claude on 20,000 copyrighted songs. The core legal question is AI training on copyrighted content fair use? Anthropic argues training is transformative, creates new capability, and doesn't store the works. Publishers argue it's systematic copying at scale that harms their market. Fair use factors cut both ways, but memorization demonstrates that some copyrighted content can leak through models. Relevant precedents include Google Books favoring transformation and music sampling requiring licenses. Globally, approaches vary from Japan's permissive stance to the EU's restrictive framework. Potential outcomes range from AI companies winning broad fair use protection to requiring expensive licenses, to split decisions with tiered frameworks, to new legislation creating compulsory licensing. Multiple lawsuits are pending, creating legal uncertainty. Users face service disruption risk. Creators can advocate, opt out, or embrace AI. Developers should document fair use rationale, consider licensing, and build from model uncertainty. This is the legal battle that could reshape AI development. Remember, we are only reporting on the news of this case and some precedents related to it. None of this is in any way legal advice. If you feel that you are involved in any way in this case or similar cases, we recommend you contact competent legal counsel. So, the Anthropic lawsuit isn't just about one company or one case. It's about establishing the rules for an entire industry. Will AI companies need to license training data? Or is learning from publicly available content protected? The answer will shape the economics, the accessibility, and the ethics of AI for years to come. This is part of an ongoing series diving deep into AI developments. We've covered browser AI, agentic AI, model retirement economics, reports on new developments as they occur in copyright law, and many other topics related to AI. Subscribe to stay current on the trends and tensions shaping AI technologies. Thanks for watching Key Advances. I'll see you in the next one.